Let's see if we can make a little bit of progress on Daf Yud Beis after wishing everyone a Gemar Chassidut Tova. And we're up to Omer of Asi. So let's see if we can find a place where we're really moving ahead here on Daf Yud Beis. And you'll see that the lines get wider towards the bottom of the Amud, but we're a little bit before, about 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines before it gets wide. Omar Rav Asi. Now this is pretty much a new sugya, and we still have a lot to do in the old sugyas, in the Biurei, Likutei HaBiurim, and Blinetta will get back to that very soon. But now we're going to study a sugya called Tsaras Eilanis. Omar Rav Asi, Tsaras Eilanis Asura. So a man died without any children. He left 2 wives, and one of them is an Eilanis. And an Eilanis is excluded from Yibum, as the Gemara is going to derive from a pasuk. And if she's excluded from Yibum, then she becomes an Eishes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah, which is an Erva, such that the Tzara is now a Tsaras Erva. Hence, Rav Asi paskins that Tsaras Eilanis Asura. Shenemar, where is the source in the Torah from which we derive that Eilanis does not fall for Yibum? For Hoya HaBechor, this is in Kitetse, in the parasha of Yibum, Asher Teleit. And then the end of the pasuk is Yakum al Shem Achiv Hametz. The Torah says that after Yibum was implemented, then the Yevamot, when she gives birth, the child will be called Al Shem Achiv Hametz, on the name of her first husband who died. And the Gemara says, Prat la'Eilanis she'eni yoledes. An Eilanis does not give birth. And therefore, the description of the Torah, the Yevamot, doesn't fit for an Eilanis. And the Tzara now of this Eilanis becomes a Tzaras Eishes Ach. She doesn't need Chalitza. She fits into the category of Arayos, the 15 Arayos that are listed in the Mishnah. Masiv Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes raises the following objection. There's Yibum Doraisa, and then there's Yibum D'Rabbanan. Now, on a Doraisa level, in the case of Yevamah, the only method, right, the Mishnah says at the beginning of Kedusha, Isha Nikneis B'Shlosha Drachin B'Kesef Shtar Ubiyah. That's true for any woman except for Yevamah. The only way that the Torah recognizes and validates a kinyan vis-a-vis the Yevamah is only through Biyah. There's no Kesef and there's no Shtar. But Midrabanan, we have Kedushay Kesef and Kedushay Shtar in the case of the Yevamah. That's what we call Maimah, Mem Aleph Mem Reish. We had Kedushin D'Rabbanan, if you recall, in the case of Yesoma Shesiua Achia, O Ima, father's not around. And now we have another Kedushay Maimah, another Kedushin D'Rabbanan in the case of Yevamah. If the Yavam declares Harei Mekudeshes Li and he gives her Kesef or Shtar, then Midrabanan, she is Mekudeshes. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean, I'm going to say something totally ridiculous, that Maimah replaces Yibum? The Torah requires Yibum. Therefore, even if the Rabbanan recognize the Kiddushin of Shtar or Kesef or Shtar in the case of Yevamah, that doesn't supplant and undermine the Torah's law of Yibum. So she still needs Yibum. The Zika to her from her original husband is still alive and well. We're not going to say that with Maimar, the Zika is removed. So that Zika will remain until such time as the Yavam will either be Miyabima with Bia, or he will give a Chalitza. But without Yiva or Chalitza, her status is that of a Yavam Lashuk. The Zika is still active. This, despite the fact that one of the brothers gave her Kesef or Shtar for Kedusha. That doesn't fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, nor does it transfer or upgrade the Zika into Ishus. The Torah says that she still has a Zika. Okay. Now we're going to learn a Mishnah later on in Daf Lamed Aleph. Shlosha achim nisun l'shalosh nashim nachrios. 3 brothers marry 3 sisters. I'm sorry, scratch that. 3 brothers marry 3 women. They're not sisters. They're nachrios. Umeis echamim. And one of these 3 brothers dies without children. Fi asaba hasheni mamar v'mes. So we have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven dies. Shimon does maimar to Reuven's wife, and he dies. Shimon dies. So Shimon never consummated Yibum. All he did was maimar. There was no bia. And now Shimon dies, and he leaves for Yibum the wife of Reuven, to whom he had given maimar, and another wife that he has. It's Sarah. Hare Elu, says the Mishnah, meaning both. Again, we'll go through with names. He has a whole diagram here. But both wives of Shimon, his own wife, original, and the wife of Reuven that he married with a maimar. The status is Hare Elu Choltzos V'lo Misyamos. Very strange. I understand very well why they both need chalitza. And the reason for that is, if we take, for example, Ashes Reuven, she needs chalitza because the Zika to Reuven is still alive, is still active. The maimar of Shimon doesn't, in no way can remove and uproot that Zika. But what about Yibum? If the Zika is still alive and well, then there should be Yibum. Yeah, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because Shimon married, and midrabbanan we recognize the validity of that kedusha. And now when Shimon dies, and we get to Levi, Levi cannot be miyabim Esha Shimon, because she really is not Esha Shimon. But what the maimar of Shimon did accomplish is it put a barrier and generated an Issa for Levi to be miyabim, the woman who, again, that's Ashes Reuven, who had a maimar with Shimon, or by Shimon. And the question is why? So let me read to you. I think, does everybody, let's see, John, you have, okay, you have Masifta. So we're on Yud Beis with a little daled bracketed on the very top of the page. Ilu haya sheni miyabma kodem shemes, if Shimon was miyabem, Ashes Reuven, then Reuven's out of the picture. His Zika is no longer. V'nashes nases eishes hasheni l'chol davar. She's now a full-fledged wife to Shimon. This is a svara that we've discussed many times in the past, that the ishus of the Yavam replaces the ishus of the original first niftar. Certainly now, this woman who was originally Ashes Reuben, but Shimon now married her with Yibum, with Bia. She's Ashes Shimon. Now, Shimon dies, she falls for Yibum to Levi. Let's take another scenario. Let's say Shimon had done nothing, zilch, and he died. Now Zikas Ruven generates a mitzvah of Yibum. Fellas mimenu l'shlish. Fine. So again, we've cleared out the two simple cases, and now we're going to get the middle case, which is more complex. The simple case would have been had Shimon been miyabem Ashes Ruvain with a full-fledged Yibum with a Maisa Bia. She would now fall with Shimon's death to Levi. There's another clear-cut case where Shimon did nothing. Ashes Ruvain falls directly to Levi with the death of Shimon. But now we have the case of Maimon. So there was not Yibum on the part of Shimon, there was not Zilch on the part of Shimon, there was Maimon. And again, the Rabbanan recognized the Maimon. So that means B'Rabbanan, there is a kinyan between Shimon and Ashes Reuben. Albeit not a Doraisa kinyan of Yibum, because Midoraisa, the only effective method of kinyan with Shimon and Ashes Reuben is only Bia, and Shimon did not implement Bia. He instead chose Kesef or Shtar, but nevertheless, the Rabbanan recognized what the Torah refused to recognize. As a Mixas kinyan. On the other hand, again, there's still a Zika to the Rishon. So why should this bother me? So here we have to introduce, I think we may have touched on this, tell me if I'm right. Ashes Shnei Mason. All of this is the Rabbanan. Feles liyibum lifnei acheim. We're talking about Levi. Machmas Shnei. Machmas Ruvain on a Doraisa level and Machmas Shimon on a Drabbana level. So as far as Levi is concerned, which of his two brothers, his late brothers, unfortunately, generate Yibum? On a Doraisa level, it's Reuven. On a Drabbana level, it's Shimon. So now Ashes Reuven falls to Yibum to Levi after the death of Shimon. On a Doraisa level, there should be Yibum. And and he has two alternatives. Levi could be Miyabim Ashes Reuven, or he could be Miyabim the Tzara of Ashes Reuven, meaning Ashes Shimon, the original Ashes, the Aval Asru Chachamim Liyabim Eshteyen Mishum Gzera. Shemeyomru sha'af shtei yevamos hanoflos mi ach echad shtei misyabos. Shenemar umeis echad mehem. And then it says, Ubein ein lo sia eish zames hachutz l'nishzar, yivam yavo alel. It says in the Pasuk, Umeis echad mehem, ein mitzvahs yibum el b'mishi yesh alel zikas yavam echad. V'lo zikas shnei yavamim. So what's the case of Zika Shnei Yevamim? I mean, I have a Durabanan case, but what's the Doraisa case? Trouble is, I don't have my Gemara. Doesn't to get myself another Gemara. Steve is not here to help me. Can you gentlemen help me out over here and open up to Daf Lamed Aleph? Yeah? Daf Lamed Aleph. All right, in the meantime, we'll just try to make a little progress here. But again, we have to come back just to clarify further what Zika Shnei Yevamim is. You know what? Maybe we'll read in the next Gemara, it'll become a little bit clearer. Maybe. Tani Allah, Amar Rav Yosef, Eshesh Mesim Zo, Itzoras Eshes Ach Me'ah. She'isur Nefila Goram. Umatzinu b'chol Torah kula kigon zos. Omer of Yosef, Zui Tsoras Eishes Ach Me'al, She'isur Hanafila Goram Lo, Matzina B'chalator Kula Kagon Zos. In other words, this whole concept of Tsoras Eishes Ach doesn't exist on a Doraisa level. It only exists Midrabbanan. Because on a Torah level, Yibum is matir the erev of Eishes Ach. Well, it makes no difference. Well, again, since we said the principle is that the Yibum replaces the original issues, that means when Shimon is Miyabim her, she's no longer under the Zika to Ruven. So you can never really have Eishes Shnei Mason, meaning she can never be considered an Eishes Ach as an error because of Ruven, because the Eishes of Shimon replaced that of Ruven. So she's an Eishes Ach vis-a-vis Shimon, but the Torah was Mater Yibum in that case. So the only possible scenario in which you could have Eishes Shnei Mason would be on a D'Rabbanan level, where the second brother did Maimar, and that creates a kind of an issues without removing the original Zika. So she now has like a double Zika. She's got a Zika through Ruvain, because that Zika was never removed. There was no fruition. There was no Yibum that reached fruition. And at the same time, there's an Ishus D'Rabbanan to Shimon through Maimar. So now Rav Shisha says the following: Zohi lemute mai lav lemute tsoras islands the Sharia. Right, what could possibly be the Isur of Tsoras islands? It can only be the erev of Eishes Ach, because the islandess doesn't fall for Yibum. She therefore becomes Eishes Ach, and her tzara is now a tzara of Eishes Ach. And Rav Yosef says, Zohi, that the only case of tzara Eishes Ach is the case of Maimar, which is the Rabbana. But we wanted to say that a Tzoras Eishes Ach exists Doraisa in the case of Tzoras Islands. And yet Rav Yosef is saying, Zuhi, only this case of Maimar. That's the only case of Eishes Ach, of Tzara, of an Ereva of Eishes Ach that impacts on the Tzara. The Tzara becomes Tzoras Eishes Ach. That's not really true. Here's another case. You have a Tzoras Eishes Ach in the case of a Tzoras Islands. But why did Rav Yosef add these words? Zohi, Tzoras Eishes, Zohi, as if to say this and only this. If you're looking for a precedent of Tzoras Eishes Ach, I'll give you one in the case of Tzoras Islands. More answers low. That was not what Rav Yosef had in mind when he said Zohi. L'm'ute Tzoras Islandis das Sira. When he said Zohi, he didn't mean to say Zohi, the case of Maimar, but rather Zohi, the case of Tzoras Islands. My Zohi, What did Rav Yosef have in mind when he said Zohi? Zohi, the Isur Nefila Garmla Sarasa. So I think Isur Nefila Garmla Sarasa means that there's no heter yibum to the tzara. But nevertheless, by a chalitza, even though there's no yibum, but there is chalitza. So that tzaras islandist doesn't need chalitza. But tzaras maimar, if you follow what I mean, does require chalitza because the doraisa halacha that she still is kuka v'omeres machmas Ruven. And Shimon's maimar does not neutralize the zika to Ruven, and therefore she needs chalitza. But in the case of Tzaras Island, she doesn't even need chalitza. Because there it's a full-fledged erva doraisa beishis ah. Because that's the status of an islandess. So we had Rav Asi, let's just review, and Tzaras Island is Asura. And now we're coming to the conclusion that Tzaras Island is Asura means not only for Yibum, but she doesn't even need Chalitza. She's a Tzaras Eishes Ach. In the case of Maimar, by contrast, since the Torah doesn't even recognize the Maimar, then Levi would certainly have to deal with the Zika to Reuven. And although there's no Yibum, the Rabbanan are going to prohibit Yibum, but nevertheless, Chalitza she certainly needs. But what I can't figure out here, Rabosai, maybe that's the sugya later on in Daf Lamed Aleph, is why is there no Yibum in the case of Maimah? And the Gemara seems to say because of Zika Shnei Yevamot, that when Ashes Ruben, who is now married, so to speak, with a Maimah to Shimon, falls to Levi, there's an Ashes Shnei Mason, and the Gemara derives Ashes Shnei Mason from a pasuk. But what is the case of Ashes Shnei Mason? I still don't have that. My time, ha midoraisa, ha midrabbanan. The case of Tzaras Island is an Ashes Ach, and the Tzaras Erev Ashes Satara. There's no need to require Chalitza. But in the case of Ashes Shnei Mesim, it's Sarasa, Dirabbanon. So if it's only the Rabbanon, they cannot be makil against the Doraisa, and there's going to be a requirement of Chalitza. Why did the Rabbanon prohibit Yibum? I don't understand. All I can tell you is that the Gemara quotes a pasuk and derives from that pasuk Zika Shnei Yevamot. But that's very odd to derive from a pasuk Zika Shnei Yevamot if there's no Metzius of Zika Shnei Yevamot. Only the Rabbanan. Steve, don't you have footnotes in your Gemara? The speaker drop louder. Oh, I think I have to change the technology. Can you speak now?
Yeah, I don't have that with me here.
Oh, where's that here in the ELC?
Yeah.
Would I be able to find it?
Yeah, it should be out there. I think it's volume 23.
Oh, on the stacks.
On the stacks, yeah.
I didn't know they had valid volume numbers. I didn't even know. I'm gonna stop this recording here for a second. He writes here, again, there are a whole bunch of notes here, a whole series, but I'm going to, fast forward to the one I think is most relevant. Maybe we'll go backwards afterwards. He says the following. It says, "V'lo zika shnei yevamim." Right, that's the drasha from the pasuk. He writes, this exposition is merely an asmachta, because the women are actually forbidden rabbinically. Under biblical law, Mimer is totally ineffective, and Reuven's wife carries only Reuven's Zika. Shimon's wife carries only Shimon's Zika. But the language is quite complicated. He says, since each of them fell to Levi from a different brother, they are both permitted to him. When he says Shimon's wife, I think he means the tzara. I think that's what he's referring to. In fact, he is required to do either yibum or chalitza with each of them, since they come from different houses. Oh, that's interesting. Hear what he's saying? That Ashes Reuven falls to yibum to Levi, and Ashes Shimon falls to yibum to Levi on a Doraisa level. And there are two zikos generating two mitzvos of yibum. So he would have to give yibum to both of them, chalitza to both of them, or one yibum, one chalitza. However, since Shimon's mimer is effective under rabbinic law, Reuven's former wife is considered a quote-unquote double widow. That's called Eshes Shnei Yevamot. The rabbis forbade the performance of yibum with a double widow or her co-wife, okay, meaning Sarah, for a reason explained on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. So we need Lamed Aleph Amud Beis for the reason behind it, but the drasha is only an asmach. Very fascinating. Intuitively, I sense something like this. Nevertheless, each of them requires chalitza, since biblically, fine. Now I'm going to go backwards to an earlier footnote, just in case it's relevant to us. He says Reuven's widow is doubly subject to yibum. First, since her husband Reuven died childless, yibum was not yet performed. She awaits yibum for his sake. Secondly, since Shimon performed mimer and then died childless, she awaits yibum for his sake under rabbinical law. Thus, rabbinically, she is a double zika attachment to Levi. Now, if Shimon had consummated yibum, that's what we spoke about before, the Masifta. his Ruvain's Zika would have been terminated, and she would have become Shimon's full-fledged wife under biblical law. She would currently carry only Shimon's Zika. Conversely, if Shimon had not performed Maimer, she would carry only Ruvain's Zika. Again, if Shimon had been Mekayim Yibum, then she would carry only a Zika from Shimon. If Shimon had not implemented Maimer, she would carry only a Zika from Reuven. Since Shimon performed Maimer and died without Yibum, without doing Yibum, Reuven's widow was partially the wife by rabbinic law of Shimon. She's currently carrying a Zika from each of her husbands, Reuven and Shimon. Okay, that's the way they summarize more or less what we saw. So the Gemara now says the following: Tnan v'kulan emesu omiyanu on his gasho on the islanders sorosein mutaros. So it comes out that according to the Mishnah, the islanders does not generate any sort of an Isa on the Tzara. That's even in the case where she's an Arab, the Tzara is an Erevim. Right? It says Sorosein Mutaros. And Ravasi was the one who said that Tzaras island is Asura. Lokasha, I think we've seen some of this we didn't see the sugi inside, but we saw Tosas quoting this. Kancha hikerba, kancha lo hikerba. So Rav Asi is talking about a case where a man, let's call him Reuven, marries an islandess. Period. And if he marries an islandess, then that's full-fledged kiddushin, which after his death, when she becomes a Yevama, now she becomes an Eishes Ach, and there's no possibility of Yibum even on Hatzara. But Khan, the Mishnah is talking about the case of Shalohiker. He was surprised to find out that she's an islandess, and therefore that's called Kiddushay Tos. Hence, there's no reason why the Tzara shouldn't fall for Yibum. I don't understand why it says, oh yeah, Tzara saying Mutaros. Mutaros means even for Yibum. Ekonami. The Katani Shenimtsu islands. Beautiful. Turned out that she was an islandess. He married her thinking she was normal, healthy. The Lo Kitani Shahayu, meaning that she was married as an islandess. Shmami. Amarava, it was top of Yud Beis on the base. Hilchasa, Soras islandess Muteres. Afilu Hikerbo. So let's just think about this. What could be the logic of Rav? We're talking about a case where there's no mekatos. It says afilu hikerbo. I think I understand. Rav is saying that this island has no nefilu liyibu. The Torah, when it says teled, right, what was the pasuk? Let's go back to the pasuk. It says, Teled, Pratli islandess, Sheni Oledes. What the Torah means to say is not that we're not going to allow Yibum. As if to say she was included together with Hatzar in Zikas Yibum, but the Torah blocks Yibum because the purpose of the Yibum will not be achieved. No. That's not what we're saying, says Rava. We're saying that she is not a candidate for Yibum. She's not included in the parsha of Yibum. It would never be a Zikas Yibum as far as an islandess is concerned. And therefore, she doesn't share a Zika with the Tsara, such that she can contagiously pass on the Erva status to the Tsara. So it comes out then that the Machlok Shimavasi and Rava is how did the Torah, in what sense did the Torah exclude islanders? Is it like an Erva, which is a blockage, but there isn't a fil yibum, or no? She, as a Gavra, in terms of her biological halachic status, is not included in the entire enterprise of Yibum. And therefore, according to Rava, the Zika never applies to the islands, such that the Tzara is a Tzara of an Erev. She's not a Tzara of the islandess at all. And then Rava says, Afilu Tzaras Bito islands. Oh, beautiful. Meaning, even if the islandess is an erva of one of the 15 arayos, she still would not impact on the tzara and remove the status of yibum vis-a-vis the tzara, because there's no nefil for yibum. It's not like a regular erva where there's a nefil for yibum, but the Torah says, "Ein esei dochalos aseh." You can't override the erva. He writes here in the Masechet Rak erva shenofeles liyibum she patters up at tzara. Aval islandess gam lule hayoso erva. Right, he's trying to explain the afilu bito. Ein enofeles liyibum. So whereas an erva has an afila for yibum, an islandess does not have an afila for yibum. So we say, I think our presentation was a little bit sharper, John, if we could say such a thing. Meaning, what we're adding here is that as a Gavra, in terms of her biological status, she's outside of Erev. I'm sorry, outside of Yibum. This reminds me, if you don't mind, only because it's a fast day today, so I'm allowing myself a little extra license. I'm up since a crazy hour today, and I already gave a daf yomish. So if you'll bear with me. There's a famous Taz about what's called Tfilas Tashlumin. What's the case? The case is that a person was onus, circumstances beyond his control, and he couldn't daven. And now, though those ma'akfim, those impediments were removed, but it's the next ona. So let's say, for example, he couldn't possibly daven shachris. And the Taz, if I'm not mistaken, says that he doesn't have tefillas tashlumin for shachris at mincha time. Why? Because tashlumin only applies when you have a chiyuv tefillah, but you didn't fulfill your chiyuv tefillah. But an anus is someone who never had a chiyuv tefillah, which leads to a whole discussion about an onein rachmana litzlan. What happens after they bury the dead, and he's chayav now in davening? So let's say they bury the dead at 3 p.m. Immediately after the burial, he has to daven mincha, because an ovel is chayav in all mitzvah Shabbat Torah. Question is, does he need a tashlumin for shachris? And the answer is no, because an onein is not included in the mitzvah of tefillah. He doesn't have tefillah. He's not even allowed to daven. There's a similar question about Havdalah. Let's say a person was an onein on Motzei Shabbos, meaning after Shabbos, they were already trying to bury the dead. And the question is, does he have to recite Havdalah? Because if you miss Havdalah, you have up till Wednesday, the first 3 days of the week. He might not even have Havdalah, even after he's an Avil, because the Machayev of Havdalah was Motzei Shabbos, and at that point he was an Onen. And an Onen is not included in any mitzvahs. I'm just giving you an example. The question is, what's the status of an islandess? And Rava's opinion is that the islandess is not included in the entire parsha of Yibam. And then Afkamina is going to be as far as Hatzara is concerned. Now, again, at the end of the day, we're not denying that, let's call him Shimon. Shimon's relationship to this islandess is that of Eishes Ach, because again, it was Hikerba. So there's no Mekach Tovs here. So if Shimon were to have a relationship with this islandess, he'd be violating the Chiv Kares of Eishes Ach. But the islandess does not pater up Hatzara for Yibum because there was no Nefila for Yibum. That's Rav Shita. So you would have said, well, if there's no Nefila for Yibum, so it's Eishes Ach Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah, and therefore the Tzara becomes the Tzoras Erev of Eishes Ach. And the answer is no, says Rav. Eishes Tzoras Erev means that the Erev had a Nefila for Yibum together with the Tzara. And the Torah says that there's no Yibum for an Erva, nor for the Tzaras Erva. That's because the Erva has a Nefila for Yibum. She's included in the Parsha of Yibum. There's a blockage that the Torah prevents the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Yibum. And in fact, okay, what I'm about to say is totally wrong, but theoretically it should be right that if Shimon is married to Leah, when Rachel, Eishes Ruvain, falls for Yibum, she's achos ishto. What happens if Leah dies? And at that point, I would say that Shimon should be miyavim Rachel. But that's totally wrong because of another principle called Kol she'eina niomer, Kol she'eina korei aleh Yevam yovoleh b'shas visa is shuveina. There's no such thing as. But again, on a theoretical, conceptual level, the fact that when Reuven died and Rachel fell for Yibum to Shimon, Shimon could not be miyabima because she's achos ishto. He's married to Leah. That's a blockage. If you remove that blockage because Nebuch, his wife, Leah dies, then there should be Yibum. Again, why there's no Yibum, we'll have to figure out, but that's a different principle. All right, so this is where we got up to. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? Let's just read another line or two or three just to finish up the sugya. So the Gemara asks, "Elahadik tani shenimtu." Remember we had a diuk that led us to the conclusion there's a difference between hikar ba and lo hikar ba, and we medayik from the language of shenimtu islandness that it was a case of lo hikar ba, whereas according to Rava, it makes no difference whatsoever whether it's hikar ba or lo hikar ba. So the Gemara changes the girs in our Mishnah to me, shehayu islandness, meaning even if it was hikar ba, he also Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan achas soras mima enes, the achas soras islandness, the achas soras mapsi bushaso, kulan mutaros. So if I'm not mistaken, what we get out of Rabbi Yochanan with the words achas soras islandness is that he's agreeing with Rava against Rav Asi, because Rabbi Yochanan is saying kulan mutaros. Now, I don't know why the Masifta mentioned Shmuel here. Wait a minute, where did Shmuel come? This picture was Ravasi, wasn't it? Oh. Shmuel has to do with the Sugya of Mima'enes.
Yes. Against
So Shmuel holds that Tzoras Mima'enes Asura. And the Gemara beforehand said that Tzoras Machzir Gushaso Asura. All right, so maybe we'll go through those cases again on a different occasion. But our emphasis here is on Tzoras Islands, and that's against Ravas. Has nothing to do with Shmuel. Now, let's just look at the Alkut Biur. We don't have time, but I just want to perhaps, set our goals for Yom Rishon. I believe we got up to A Beis. And there's a section on the left that says Biur Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, the Shitas HaRashba. So you remember the Rashba, just to refresh our memory, that when Shimon gives chalitza, so there's no longer an Iser Erva. There's no longer an Iser Erva vis-a-vis the Choletz. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, even vis-a-vis the other brothers. So the Rashba says, because there was a heter on the Erv of Eiches Ach before he did Chalitza, and the Chalitza does not undermine that heter. Once she was Muteres, then the Iser was Paka. Once the Iser was Paka, I'm talking about the Iser Eiches Ach, then Shuvein Chosev. It's like, we don't say Chosev Enir. There's another Iser because of the Pasuk Lo Yivne, if you remember. That's only Chai Lav. Now, if this be the case, then according to the Rashba, we understand very well the Shita Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that there's no Eiches Ach on any of the brothers, nor on any of the other Saras. And the reason for that is because B'Shas Nefila, when Ruvain died, there was a heter on the Iser Erev of Eiches Ach and Eino Chosev Enir. So he quotes the Achiezer, Reb Chaim Ozer, he says, L'chora lefi zeh, tzorich lomar, shelo kosav harashba, es yisodo, elo b'shitas Reb Yochanan. Okay, fine. That's exactly what we said. Aval Reish Lakish, behechrech eino nimshach heter, elo bi'oda b'zikasa. In other words, according to Reish Lakish, the matir is a temporary matir that paradoxically is generated by the Zika. I mean, we always see Zika as an oser, but Zika is also a matir because it generates a mitzvah yibum. But the Isur is only removed, meaning the Isur Eiches Ach, on a temporary basis. It's like, you remember in fish, they have the symbiosis, where one fish, rise on top of the other fish. So that the heter on the Erev of Eshesach rides on the Zika. Once the Zika is Paka with Chalitza, the Heter on the of Zika, meaning the Heter of the Erev of Eshesach is Paka. So if you ask me, I don't see any kasha here. I'm not sure exactly what the Achiezer wants to, where he's taking us. L'shitasa mashe niftu acholetz v'acholetzes nikares ena el mishum anituk lalav. Wonderful. Nituk lalav means that although after chalitza we were mafkia the zika, and it was only the zika that was matir the Erev Eshesach, therefore the choletz, no less than any of the other brothers, should now be included in the Erev Eshesach. Why is the choletz dropped down to the level of chayvei lavim of lo yivna? But the answer is because that's the nituk halav. The Torah was menatek the lav as far as the choletz is concerned. That's Reish Lakish. All right. So I'm making a note here that we're up to the Karen Ora. He quotes the Karen Ora here. And that's where Mitzvah Hashem, we would pick it up on Yom Rishon. I'm just curious. Are we back here in face-to-face, and today's the exception because of the fast day or something, or yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
For me, it was just for the fast day.
All right, no, it calms me down a little bit because I find the Zoom is very taxing, very challenging for the person, especially on a fast. Okay, then? All right. Thank you so much.